I call the Honourable Minister Stephen Joyce.
Mr Chair, well, it's an interesting little story that Mr Parker runs. We have actually had in this country, Mr Speaker, an independent reserve bank focused on fighting inflation since 1989, Mr Speaker, which of course is a Labor government which in all other respects they're ashamed of over on the other side, but nevertheless they seem to be a little bit happy with this one. That model is based on transparency and independence. And Labor have now decided, or more particularly Mr Parker has now decided, to pretend you can simultaneously have low inflation, low interest rates, a low exchange rate, low house prices and a current account surplus, all because David Parker magically says that's possible. The only way you can have a few of those things is if you allow more inflation in New Zealand. There is actually, it's a law of physics that actually, unless you have the independent monetary policy, then you will have more inflation. And Labor are basically saying, if they're going to change this thing, then they're basically saying the interest rates would be different, and the interest rates would be different, then that means more inflation, Mr Chair. And all inflation does is destroy the savings of New Zealanders. It makes it more difficult for businesses and consumers to invest, and it sets off wage and price spirals. And interestingly, it hits the people who are struggling the most the hardest, Mr Chair. As one commentator said after Labor had announced their policy, it's deeply bizarre that the Labor Party would actually actively promote policies that would harm the worst off in society the most. And that's what Labor's proposed softening of their attitude to inflation would achieve. Which of course brings me to the small issue of the KiwiSaver idea, the interest rate jack-up idea, the big tool that Mr Parker likes to refer to, and which I respond to today. But the moment you think about that, it falls apart, because housing, Mr Chair, is less than half of New Zealanders' debt. The rest is companies, credit cards, farmers, councils, government agencies. Labor is going to tell, apparently, businesses and councils to carry on borrowing and spending because wage and salary earners will be forced to have more money taken out of their take-home pay to do the belt-tightening for them, Mr Chair. And weirdly, Labor have still not come up with any sort of indication of how much they would require people to put into their KiwiSaver accounts to offset a 1% increase in interest rates. And here we are, I think it was the beginning of May this thing came out, so we're 6 weeks down the line and Labor are still stum on any suggestion of what the actual trade-off would be between rising interest rates and forcing people to put more money in their KiwiSavers. Well, Mr Chair, over this side of the House, we actually did the exercise. We reckon it's about they would have to increase to get 1%. The KiwiSaver contributions by around 6%. Now, they're out there today saying they're already going to increase your KiwiSaver. It's true. And if it's not true, then the opposition should actually come up with some numbers. These are not made-up numbers. It's actually worked out. And what we know is the opposition has come up with nothing. So here we are debating the Reserve Bank Act, Mr Speaker, and the Reserve Bank, and the Labor Party are proposing to throw away the independent control of inflation, and they're talking about this big tool, this weird big tool, Mr Chair, which apparently will magically can keep interest rates under control while boosting people's KiwiSaver rates, and they have no idea how that works. It's actually embarrassing in a debate around Crown entities for that sort of ridiculous policy-on-the-fly rubbish that the opposition has come up with, Mr Chair. So fundamentally, the good thing about the Reserve Bank policy is that it controls inflation. Inflation is very tough, particularly on those people struggling the most in society, Mr Chair, and what we know is the Labor Party would change that. We know they would relax the control of inflation, Mr Chair, and we know that their monetary policy approach is to force people to have more money out of their take-home pay, but don't worry, you'll all get it back when you're 65. So while you're sitting there with your families and under Labor Party-type inflation conditions, which as we know is about 11% or about 8% what it was the last election, higher again, and that was the high inflationary times, and they'd be saying to New Zealanders, don't worry, the solution is to whip some more money out of your pay Don't worry that prices are going up. You'll feel it for, I don't know, maybe a year. But the good news is that in the long run, the very long run, when you're 65, you'll get a little bit of it back. That's their answer, Mr. Chair, and what a load of rubbish.
The question is that the report of the Finance and Expenditure Committee on the 2012-13 financial review of the Reserve Bank of New Zealand be noted. Those of that opinion will please say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Honourable members, I understand that the next entity members wish to debate is the New Zealand Transport Agency. The question is that the report of the Transport and Industrial Relations Committee on the 2012-13 financial review of the New Zealand Transport Agency be noted.
Mr. Chairman.
I call the Honourable Member Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's great to be here debating the financial review of the New Zealand Transport Agency because just yesterday we had